It's very simple to go out and watch the sunrise, very simple to make sure you're all covered up when you're indoors and expose yourself outdoors. It's a very complicated story to explain that, Dr. Jack. I do want you to talk about the migration of 2 million wildebeest and the deuterium in the grass. In South Africa, we're huge wildlife fans. We're out in the bush. I'm so grateful for my upbringing. I spent my life outdoors. The weather's incredible. We get 82% sunny days here in Johannesburg. Our UV index is high, mostly all over the country. But tell us about the great migration from the Serengeti Nature Reserve to the Masai Mara Nature Reserve, how these animals know how to move, and how important it is that we, as species, take these things that are simple, like light, and implement them, because they are the things that move the needle. They're the game changers. We've got this documentary, The Game Changers, about going vegetarian and veganism. And you've said you can only really have that diet if you're living at the equator under huge UV light, not exposing yourself to blue light and EMFs, significant EMFs. Tell me that light is the greatest game changer and how these animals know to move.
Well, you have to realize your eye and your skin are solar panels. And I think the most amazing part of this story is most people, when they hear me talk about stuff like this, they're like, their head starts to explode. They're like, how am I ever going to learn all this stuff? And then I tell them the story about the wildebeest in Africa. And I said, the wildebeest in Africa don't know who Richard Feynman is. They don't know who Einstein is. They have absolutely no idea that deuterium absorbs more electromagnetic radiation versus light hydrogen. But you know what they do know a lot about? They're experts at? They're experts at knowing when the grass is good and when the grass sucks. And then you start to realize, well, what creates grass? Photosynthesis. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, most people learn in third grade. You take CO2 from the air, you take water and sunlight, and you make sugar. That's it. That's all you need to know. It's not that hard to get. The interesting part of the story, the thing that breaks down photosynthesis, in other words, it's a mirror image. It's like a spider on a mirror, like you can see my fingers here. Mitochondria reverse that process. Mitochondria take sugar and make CO2 and water. That's the part of the equation a lot of people forget. So the mitochondria in the animal is paying attention to the reverse process. These animals love grass. So when they eat the grass grows. Everybody in Africa knows this, even if you live in the equator. The equator only has 2 seasons, wet and dry, okay? But it turns out even in that part of the world and in the subtropics, which you're at, there's a growing season. And it turns out people know that the grass grows differently in different parts of the season as it goes around the planet.
Absolutely.
But when the animal eats the grass, it has 3 inputs. What's the first input? Light through the central retinal pathways. What's the second input? Light through the skin. That's actually what controls the animal's coat as it goes. Why? The coat varies as the planet rotates. But here's the interesting part. When the animal eats the grass, it can tell the difference between the deuterium level in the grass and the light isotope. And for those of you who don't know this, deuterium, when it's higher in grass, tastes a little bit sweeter. So guess what? Now the animal knows when the grass taste changes, and it knows that means that the ATPase doesn't spin as fast, then the animal needs to go where the grass is better, where it's more deuterium depleted. That's exactly how it happens. So when the Africans are amazed when they see the wildebeest go through the Nile and see those Nile crocodiles, how would an animal ever do that? You would be shocked to know that the system within the wildebeest can tell the difference between a proton and a neutron stuck together at a mitochondrial level. That is the instinct built into you. That's the magic that's there. And the thing is, that migration helps the crocodiles. It helps the entire ecosystem because the entire ecosystem in Africa is based on positive and negative feedback loops. Well, guess what? You may be shocked to hear this. Everything I've told you for the last hour is also based on positive and negative feedback loops in your central retinal pathways. You may not have realized it because we haven't mentioned it, but what happens when you affect either the negative or positive feedback in a feedback loop. You extinguish both sides of the equation. So that's the reason why when you live in a blue light world, you ruin both sides of the equation and you can't get better. That's the reason why the doctor's prescription pad doesn't work. And it turns out there is actually a biologic purpose for those wildebeest that get eaten by the Nile crocodiles, because then the crocodiles also affect the ecosystem in there. They affect the way the rivers run, how vegetation grows, how everything goes. And people don't realize that nature, we're all connected to nature's fabric. The threads that we're connected to, some may be the most invisible connections you could ever imagine. We just talked about one. Most people have no idea how it's related to the deuterium content, both in the water and the grass, that these animals pay attention to. But I have news for you. You pay attention to these things as well. And you don't know it. And the reason why you don't know it is because people have not jumped down this rabbit hole enough to actually look at what's happening at a biochemical level. When you open that medical textbook up, like when you had Tim Noakes on, I guarantee you he doesn't even know that we only strip light hydrogen out in our mitochondria. And the water that's made of mitochondria isn't like the water that's in the waterways in Africa. It turns out the water in Africa sucks. Most people may be shocked to hear this. Why? Because equatorial water has the highest levels of deuterium. It actually marries to our blood plasma. But why does that work? Because when you live inside the tropics, deuterium works with UV light to create frequencies of light that do what? Ooh, we're going to tie a nice circle up. Remember I told you that tryptophan has a 200 to 400 nanometer absorption spectrum? Here's the interesting part of that story. Why would nature use tryptophan when the sun doesn't make 200 nanometer light? Remember, it gets blocked by the magnetosphere. You know how it works? You make it utilizing deuterium in your body.
Wow. Jeez, I didn't know.
How do you like that?
Yeah, that's
See,
incredible.
this is more than nature. This is more than magic that's built into you. That's the reason why nature put more deuterium in the water inside the tropics in Africa. Deuterium depleted water naturally occurs at the poles. Why? Light's not as strong there. See, light is stable within the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer. You're at the 26th latitude, so you're very similar to me. I'm at the 28th latitude north. You're 26 south. Right now, you and I are seeing mirrored images. I'm coming into autumn. You're coming into spring. But the key thing is what's happening in our ecosystems is deuterium depletion is different in the rain cycles where we are. When you're inside the tropics, hardly anything changes. I always tell people this story because the easiest way for us in the States to get to the tropics is to go to Cancun. It's at 20 north, so it's easy to get to. When you're, say, just for argument's sake, in New York in the 40s, and say it's December 21st. For you, that's your summer solstice. For us, it's the winter solstice. If you're in New York on December 21st, it's dark at 4:30 in the afternoon. But here's the funny thing. If you are 24 degrees latitude south in Cancun, you have 11 hours and 21 minutes of sunlight. In other words, you don't have 8 hours of sunlight. Yeah. So what's the difference in latitude mean? It actually is the level of sunlight you get. So nature built the water cycle to be deuterium depleted where sunlight isn't as powerful. Yeah. And where the sun is powerful, you can have a higher deuterium content. That's fundamentally why the book Game Changers actually makes sense. If you want to be a rabbit and eat like a rabbit, you should live inside the tropics. But if you are like the rest of the population on this planet, just so we're all clear, 99% of the population on planet Earth lives outside the tropics. Therefore, if you eat like a rabbit, you're a freaking idiot. Okay?
Yeah. So that's great. And why is it also with food then at the tropics, you can have a banana in great UV light, but having a banana in the middle of winter when UV light is low, that's not going to help you because it's filled with deuterium. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's actually when that occurs. See, in the States, I can't use this argument that I use with you because you happen to live at a latitude where bananas do grow year round. So do I. Bananas do grow at the 28th latitude. So technically I can eat them year round, but I do not. I will tell you that anytime you eat a fruit that does not grow at your latitude via the photosynthetic mechanism, when you do eat it because it happens to be in the grocery store, you create molecular chaos in you. What is the molecular chaos? You have too much deuterium inside your matrix that ruins the spin rate of the ATPase. That reduces energy production. That harms you. That's the simple, easiest answer I can give you for you to understand why, if it doesn't grow in that latitude, you shouldn't eat it. And just because it's in the grocery store doesn't mean it's a good thing.
So you should eat seasonally. That's number one, locally. Secondly, you should eat outside in the light, not under blue light. I do want to move on to 5G because now that's changing the game, the electromagnetic radiation, even if you live in equatorial Africa, even if you're under incredible light, even if you're outside totally naked or with kaniki clothing on, or watching your blue light at night and your toxicity, the EMF and 5G is changing the game. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, you need to understand that all the technology that we have adopted from 0G to 5G has effects. So if you remember the last hour and 20 minutes, we talked about this quantum dance between leptin and melanopsin, that they're two sides of the coin, the heads and the tails. What you need to understand is the way light impacts the solid state semiconductors, both in our eye and our body. We gave an example of bone earlier. I want you to think about your skin and your eye the exact same way, because really leptin and melanopsin are chromophores that deal with light. Well, it turns out these are surfaces. You have two other surfaces that we've talked briefly about, but not a lot. That's your lung surface, which is a big deal right now with COVID, and the gut surface, which we just talked about with the wildebeest. Those four surfaces have special type of semiconductors in them called topologic insulators. And topologic insulators work by the spin, the quantum spin number. This is not something we've talked about. And when I say spin, most people are going to think about a top. That's not what quantum spin is. And it turns out that the quantum spin state of different things is present. So since we just talked about deuterium, let's talk about it. The quantum spin state of deuterium and light hydrogen is radically different. You can look it up yourself. That's one of the reasons how biophysically the wildebeest tells the difference. It also changes the magnetic moment that's present. These are physics terms, but this is exactly how the process is built into the animals and built into you. You need to realize that 5G is kind of like a blinder for the eyes and the skin that doesn't allow all the information that's present in sunlight to come to your skin. So I'll give you an example of how this works in the States. We have a big problem in California. California happens to be a very nice place from an environmental standpoint. You know, nice light, good weather, it's higher latitude. But the interesting thing is, even when humans take their clothes off and go outside in California, they don't make as much vitamin D. So the reason that this happens is most people know from the rest of the world, a lot of Hollywood TV programming, UHF, VHF, gets broadcast out from California and sent all over the world. That bounces off the ionosphere so we can get to Africa. That's actually how this occurs. What people don't know is that humans just started to do this in the last 100 years, both first with radio and then it's moved to TV. The interesting thing is the more EMF you use, and I'm talking about non-native EMF, because the sun is native EMF, but non-native EMF changes the size of the Van Allen belts that are above the planet. And remember, that's where the cathode ray from the sun hits the magnetosphere. The magnetosphere gets rid of all the bad electromagnetic radiation, only allows 250 to 780 light through. That's what we're designed to work with. Well, when the Van Allen belts get thicker, it changes terrestrial sunlight as it falls to Earth. And it actually reduces your ability to change cholesterol to the inactive form, or I should say the storage form of vitamin D. Therefore, you cannot make vitamin D. This is very counterintuitive for people to understand because they think, well, if I take my clothes off, I'm good. It turns out, if you happen to be in places that employ more technocracy, it's a big issue. Now, in your continent, you're fortunate. This is one of the few times I will tell you that I think everybody who's African is extremely lucky. And this is crazy coming from an American, because everybody who's African wants shit that we have in the United States, which, trust me, you don't want it. And, when we see some of the things that even go on in equatorial Africa, with the politics that are there and the things that have happened in the past, that's one thing. But I'm talking specifically about biology. I think it's the one continent in the world that can probably lead people to understand more. Why? Because you don't have a huge population density. You have a massive continent. Your population is in dense centers, kind of like you're in Johannesburg. South Africa is a really big, country, but everybody tends to be in one place. Well, this works just like any other kind of radiation. If you're next to the posts or the masts that connect to this, you're going to have a problem. But if you go to the bush, you can actually do quite well at the 26th latitude and not have a problem. And you probably will not need a doctor to write you prescriptions for statins or to put you on vitamin D. You just have to get your skin and eyes in the game. The problem is, if you live in a place like the United States where we have 330 million people, you tend to be in all these big cities and these nodes connect to each other and they fly over your head, you have a big problem. This is the reason why the United States has certain diseases more prominently than you see in Europe. Europe has different standards. So the amount of EMF made changes the energy transformation from the sun. Remember, in the beginning of this podcast, for those of you who may have forgot this, I said that energy is not created. We're not breaking any laws of conservation here, but we're designed to take 250 nanometer light to 760 light, transform it into things that we need to use to run all the magic that's present in a biochemistry book. The interesting part is really what technology is doing at a 30,000 foot level without getting deep into the science, is that it's actually changing our ability to transform energy in our body. And it's making it way tougher. And that means that you need to get or disconnect from the non-native EMF more. That's the reason why people who watch too much TV tend to get fatter. Why? The blue light from the screens and the non-native EMF. If you tend to put the cell phone up to the side of your head, there's studies out there in Israel that show you get tumors in your parotid gland. You do this, you also have a higher level of getting acoustic aromas in your brain, which is something that I take care of. Also, brain tumors are higher. So you always want to use the cell phone, put it on speakerphone and put it away from yourself. Also, don't put the cell phone in your pocket next to your gonads unless you want to be sterile or you want to use it as birth control. Don't put the laptop on your lap. You'll wind up like Steve Jobs. These are the reasons why these things happen. But what I need you to understand from the biophysics perspective, why fundamentally does this happen without getting too deep into it? Very simply. Remember I told you the story about the cell phone, 38 microseconds faster compared to the genes down below? When you use technology, put it here, you actually change that mechanism in your body. Okay. In other words, you're changing the time. And this always screws with people. When I try to teach people about really what Einstein said in special and general relativity, because that's what GPS works on, and those two things, I'll try to make it as simple as I can for your audience and for you. 500 years ago, Newton basically said that light varies and space and time are fixed. Einstein came along in 1905 and said exactly the opposite. He said light was fixed, but space and time bent. And nobody could believe it was true. Turns out Einstein was right. GPS is proof that he was right. But here's the interesting thing. If I said to you, Steve, that we can bend space and time right now, would you believe me? Right here, we can prove it. You would probably go, I don't understand how we would do that. Well, I'm going to explain it to you. You know that we're talking to each other. It's nighttime where you are right now, or close to night. No, not nighttime. It's probably afternoon.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, it's 8:20 in the morning. So we have totally different time. But we are sending this information over the internet, probably through a cable in the Atlantic Ocean. And we're actually able to experience time at the same time together, yet time is different in both places. So light is able to bend space and time. It's the same thing if we were both listening to a station in say, Argentina, we're here. that radio signal bounces off the ionosphere, comes to our various locations, space and time shrunk, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
But people don't think about it like this.
That's a good
That's
analogy.
exactly right. And that's exactly what Einstein found. And that's how we found out about gravitational lensing, that light actually bends around things with mass. And that's actually how Einstein proved that Newton was wrong. He did it through the mercury perihelion in an African jungle in 1911. That's where Sir Alfred Eddington proved Einstein correct. We now know he's correct because that's how GPS works. It works because gravitational lensing is a big deal. But we don't realize that we're using it right now when we talk on this podcast. And the reason why I think having a discussion like this is important, because it's going to get people to realize that you actually do see this stuff in your life, but the problem is you don't recognize what you're seeing. And you said something about me in the beginning that makes me different. You're right. I observe nature differently than other people. And I like to teach people about this issue, because then it gets you to realize, well, if this happens with a cell phone device, why wouldn't this happen with us?
Yeah.
And then when you begin to realize that there's stories out there. Now you have another book that's probably not on your shelf, but a very famous British guy named Jim L. Khalili wrote a book about how a European robin uses the Earth's magnetic field and light to navigate all over the planet. And you go, wait a minute. You're going to tell me that this happens through a magnetic field change with light. So there's a magnetic optical clock in the bird's eyes that allows them to navigate. And yet everybody in Africa, everybody in the United States, everybody in Europe knows that birds, turtles, things in the water, they all know how to navigate. Turns out you do too. But the reason that you can't do it so well, Steve, is because you've been electromagnetically polluted, so that this sense that you do have is atrophied. The people that still have this sense very well are indigenous people that you can find in the bush in Australia, that you can find in equatorial Africa. The Masai, the Hazda, if they don't have the cell phones up to the side of their head, they actually can do this.
Yeah.
And this ability is present in all life. That's the reason why you now can pick up a book and learn about all these things and how it works. And you can learn about quantum tunneling of both electrons and protons. It's just an amazing story about how this all works. And it's our job, whether you're religious or not. I always tell my members this. I think the Bible's an interesting book. I think all the books of religion are interesting because they all have the same story. They always talk about light. So I always tell my religious people, no matter what religion they are, God gave you the story. It's about light, but you know what he didn't do? He didn't give you the recipe. Your job, if you choose to accept it, is to figure out the recipe of how it works. And really, this is what this podcast is all about. Because I will tell you, out of all three of the three-legged stool, light is the most fascinating one because it is capable of doing things that just blow your mind. And the more you learn about it, you begin to realize that almost everything in your body is a photoreceptor for light at some level. And your job, if you choose to accept it, is to figure out that level and then figure out how it connects to the greater whole so you can understand truly how your eye works, how your skin works, how your liver works, why you really got diabetes.
Great. Dr. Jack, you've been so gracious with your time. I've got two more questions. One is, I believe the greatest field, the greatest magnetic field is your purpose and your calling. And it stems from Simon Sinek's work, but it stems from a mantra that you've said for a while. If you're not good enough for yourself, who are you good enough for? And I find that people, they might apply the light diet, they might apply the correct movement diet, they might even change their location where they live or their EMF toxicity, but they often don't sustain it or maintain it because they don't discover what their true purpose is. They don't discover and value their purpose, and they don't delight in their purpose. So would you agree with me, or do you have any views that your purpose and your calling is, and your belief is the greatest magnetic field that you can have. I mean, I got a 4-year-old and a 16-year-old. And my 4-year-old, what I tell her every single day, so that she builds a belief and a magnetic field, a force that says, I've got value to add, I've got significance to add, I've got a purpose and a calling to add. Because if you believe that, you'll make the changes. You know, we're thinking of moving to get down to the sea because I want to post my Instagram story with my feet in the sand like you. I want to get in the sea, which is a Faraday cage, every single day. I want to make sure that I watch the sunrise every day. But that's based on me believing this very true fact, that I've got a purpose and a calling. I believe that's a field, that's a force. Tell us your thoughts.
I think it is. It's the electromagnetic force in you. But what I would tell you, and not to make this so scientific and take, you know, the emotion out of it for you, I believe it's a function of your spin rate or your ATPase. So I'm going to tell you what happened to me at 40 years old is I got more connected to the things that really work in us. And as my spin rate got better, my curiosity got even better. My insight got better. My forethought got better. My precognition, my postcognition all improved. My emotions also changed. So I told you earlier that when your passion meets your purpose, then you know you're there. I do believe that your mitochondrial energy efficiency, that means your endogenous redox potential, totally links to what you're saying. Absolutely. Why? This in evolution, we talked about whales, dolphins, and us. This is a Ferrari engine. This is nature's Ferrari engine. This is the reason why our brain gets 20% of our cardiac output. No other organ comes even close. The reason for that is because these mitochondria here, this is the most mitochondrial dense thing in your head. So the better the mitochondria work, the more you're going to meet, your passion's going to meet your purpose. That's what I think when you asked me before about how will doctors and patients really change, this is it. And it scales all the way back to a crazy guy in history, Rasputin. Remember, he's the one that came up with the term animal magnetism. I believe that people are drawn to people who really think well because their mitochondria function better than theirs. And I think that's the reason why people are drawn to those people. And it doesn't mean that it's just in certain part of your body. I think for like guys that say work out and they have really nice bodies, some people are drawn to that, but we're not gorillas. We didn't put all of our mitochondria into our muscles. We're humans. We put all of our mitochondria into our brain and our heart. This is the reason why we hold hands. This is the reason why we make love, we face each other. This is the reason why we kiss. We do things that other animals don't do, and this is a function of where evolution has buried our mitochondria. So I do agree with what you're saying, but unfortunately, I try to bring it right down to light water magnetism because it really is a function of your mitochondrial efficiency in your brain, in my opinion. That's what I believe based on all the things that I know now. And I think if you teach your 4-year-old and your 16-year-old some of this, even if they understand a little bit of it, that may be all it takes, because there may be something that happened down their life, like happened to me, where your passion meets your purpose. It doesn't mean it has to be a good thing. Sometimes it's failure. That's why I tell all my members, always embrace the suck. Why? Because sometimes the suck in your life is going to bring you to a place that'll blow your mind. Where did I get that original idea, Steve? When I read the damn book, Robin Sharma's book. The guy was the best attorney in New York City, according to the fable, and had a heart attack in the courtroom. Thought his life was over. When you read the story, you realize his life just began with that heart attack.
Yeah. Well, it's just about being courageous, isn't it? You've got to take that step. Once you're curious and you're courageous, I think that combination is powerful, and that's who you are. I've read Going Somewhere, Andrew Marino's book. I cried tears because of, what big telco is really doing and how they're just covering up. And what other books, other than what I've got behind me, could you suggest? I mean, I'm going to suggest all my members to join Patreon. I'm still getting through the blogs. I'm still building a knowledge base, applying this, seeing it change my life, transform my life, my members' lives, in my tribe, my family's lives. And we go out in Johannesburg at night. We're the only family, or myself and my son especially, wearing red glasses. People laugh at us. You know, they think we're crazy nuts back here. But what other books and what other resources would you suggest people tap into?
I think Roland Van Wyck's book about light sculpting life is huge, but that's a book that you have to wait to read after you get some of the other ones down. Then I think when you want to get into dissecting the most dominant part of the electromagnetic spectrum of sun, which is infrared A light, then you need to read the work of Tina Carew. Her name is spelled Tiinakuru. She's a researcher from Russia that's done amazing work on infrared A light in mitochondria. The guy in the States that's published a lot on this is Dr. Michael Hamlin. Hamlin just wrote a book about actually how red light affects neurologic function. It just came out in 2019. Book is excellent. Tina Carew also has books. She's got a book out that's called 10 Lectures on Photobiomodulation. I'm trying to think. I think Jim L. Khalili's book, spectacular. I think it has different names in different parts of the world. The one that's here is
Life on the
Edge.
Yeah.
I also think a guy that we didn't talk too much about, and we should have, but this is kind of more like an introductory or drinking from the fire hose of Jack Cruz. But if you want to learn more about mitochondria, I would tell you the guy to start with is Nick Lane.
Okay.
Nick Lane has written multiple books. He's a great writer. I respect him, but Nick is missing a lot. But it's a great way to learn about mitochondria. The world expert in mitochondrial medicine, as far as I'm concerned, is Doug Wallace. Doug hasn't written any books, but he's written a shit ton of papers. Everything that Doug has done on YouTube, you should assimilate and swallow. I'm trying to think. I just gave you a lot. I think all of Becker's books. Becker and Marino have written other books. I think they have 4 of them. One of them is Cross Currents. Another one is Electromagnetism and Life. Those would be good. I think John Ott's book, you have it behind you. That's a phenomenal book, and it's very easy to read.
What about the Extinction book? Because that'd be my last question as we close out. You know, the New York lady about, is this the last
Elizabeth Colbert.
Yeah,
Elizabeth Colbert's book that's the kind of book I think it's going to have 2 effects on people. They're going to read it and get scared shitless. And then the other person's going to read it and get really curious and go, how did she go all over the 7 continents and make these observations? And it turns out what she found in the 6th extinction, for those of you who don't know, there's been 5 extinctions on planet Earth that we know about. Elizabeth Colbert makes the connection that about for the last 125 years when man has started to use technology, that everything on this planet's dying. And it's dying at different rates, which is what you'd expect based on what I told you about melatonin, how it changes. The book is an eye-opener because it'll take your local environment where you are either in Africa, Australia, United States, and they show you how things are dying at different rates around you below your perception. And then you'll begin to look to your left and look to your right. And then you'll know why your African brothers and mothers and sisters and cousins have some of the diseases they have.
Yeah.
And then you'll start to realize that this same process is going on in us, because it's really hard for humans to accept that there's an extinction event going on with us, because there's 8 billion of us on the planet.
Yeah.
You know, we're the most dominant animal on the planet. But the problem is we're not a wilded animal anymore. We're not as good as we think. I can tell you right now, if you take the American Indian or say the Equatorial African from 1,000 years ago, those 2 elite athletes would demolish anybody on planet Earth today, because we've changed the electromagnetic footprint of our globe everywhere. I don't care where it is. There's pockets of where today people are better. But do I think that we've undergone a cognitive de-evolution? Do I believe that we've actually altered our bodies through this altered free radical signaling mechanism to be less than we were when we came from the cradle of life at the East African Rift 2 to 6 million years ago? In my opinion, yeah. Your mileage may vary. Your reading may make you come to a different experience. But I think Elizabeth Colbert's book, because it's old now, it's not a new book. It's a really good book. I'll tell you, I just thought of another book that I like. Cosmo Sapiens by John Hands. Great book. because it tells you about the paradigms of belief that are in science. And you need to know just how unsupported some of the things that people hold as gospel, like, and that's especially true in cosmology. Most of the things that we believe in cosmology is actually, I want to be tactful about this, but I also want to be not tactful. People like Richard Dawkins make fun of like Muslims, Christians, and Jews because they believe in God. I will tell you the belief in some of the things that Dawkins has are more religious in terms of scientism that have absolutely no support. And I think when you're a critical thinker, you need to realize the fallacy of their arguments. And when you see it for yourself, it's the mark of an educated mind to take something you fundamentally don't believe, examine it for yourself, and then decide what you see. And I will tell you, that's probably the single most critical thing that happened to me 15 years ago. I always knew I was pretty smart, but I realized I wasn't critical enough to examine the belief paradigms that I had and that I was entrenched in both in my job and my personal life. Now, I'm much more open to destroying those beliefs because as new data comes in, it's the mark of an educated mind. You take new data and then change what you believe and go from there. That's part of the reason when we talked about Tim Noakes earlier, why I have a big problem with that. I respect him because I know he's a smart guy. I just can't believe he's myopic enough to realize that eating a banana in South Africa is equivalent to living a life of blue light. In fact, the blue light is worse because it radically changes your free radical signal, much more than a banana will. But he's not really got to that point yet. And I don't know. I think it's because the paradigm of belief of biochemistry, the paradigm of belief of nutrition science, that's what he knows. He's already made a change in his life from being a conventional doctor to now being a low carb ketogenic guy. But I really wish, I think your idea about pounding him about deuterium and that it's a deuterium depleted diet is a good one. But I hope people listen to this conversation we're having and realize that we can have a cogent discussion that's calm where we can disagree. And that's the other thing I can tell you that I like about science, that we're supposed to be skeptics. We're supposed to challenge our beliefs. Unfortunately, I will tell you, I don't believe we do that much in science anymore. That's one of the big breaks for doctors. Peer review, all the literature is broken. Why? Because you've studied the wrong things. What good is the paper? And that's exactly what's happening in biology right now.
Just one last personal question. We're thinking of moving to the 29th degree latitude, which is Durban. It's at sea level, but it's going to give us more of an opportunity to get our feet in the sand and to get in the sea. You recommend going from a 26 degree latitude with a greater population density, but at 4,500 feet, to then move to the coast where it's going to be a greater outdoor living. It's more tropical, the environment. The winter's not really cold at all. What are your views on us moving and Johannesburg versus Durban?
Yeah, I would say just from the number one thing you have to remember with non-native EMF, everything but the electromagnetic force works on one principle, and that's the inverse square law. So I tell people the single number one metric to use when you consider where you live now should be the population density. And the reason why I say this may shock you when I say it, but my members know this on my website. A 5G antenna doesn't bother you as long as there's not a lot of obedient idiots connected to it. The problem is when you have 1 million people connect to a tower and you happen to be in close proximity, that's a problem. Like where I am right now in Destin, Florida, this is the time of the year where everybody leaves, the summer's over, so there's not a lot of people here. We go from 1 million people in this area to like 20,000. So are the 5G antennas better on a relative basis? Here we just employed Cruz rule, general special relativity. We're back to Einstein's thing, and it links to electromagnetic force. You need to realize that population density is key. The more people that use it, the worse it is. The thing that you're losing by going to 29th latitude is probably you're losing a little bit of water chemistry, you're losing a little bit about power of light, but you're offsetting it probably because you have a huge change in the inverse square law. So I'd say net, it's probably okay. But as I tell my members, don't assume anything, always test. because you can go to a low population dense area and find that you may live in a geopathic stress area. The most common geopathic stress area in Africa, in case you don't know, is called the Sahara Desert. Okay. But there's going to be pockets in South Africa that are also like this. I think the water chemistry is probably your biggest deficit in the Southern Hemisphere, because you, just like Australia, suffer from the donut hole problem. And that really ruins the water chemistry. I think the number one thing I would recommend you do is probably import your water and drink low latitude water. I don't know where you'll get it in the Southern Hemisphere, but Icelandic water is great. We have it everywhere in the States. This water is easy for us to get. I know that it's a problem for people in the Southern Hemisphere because Australia and the southern tip of Africa are dealing with two issues: the South Atlantic anomaly and the ozone hole that ruins water chemistry. And when you really understand what we talked about earlier, that light and water really are the battery that actually mitochondria operate with. Moving further south, I think corrections that I would make would be, I would change the water that I use. That's what I would do. Yeah. And I would probably be a little bit more ketogenic than normal. Doesn't mean I wouldn't eat fruit at certain times of the year and things like that, but I would probably be a little bit tighter, especially as I got older.
Yeah. Great. Well, I had Kribben Governor on my show, and he's got that low D water that I think comes from the high levels somewhere in Canada. Or I'm going to have Laszlo Boris hopefully on the show, and we can talk about, we haven't tested the water. No one knows about deuterium depleted water in South Africa, to be honest. So I think that's those important tests to do. The last one about the head, I've never heard it on a podcast. Should people wear hats? I mean, I go out, I don't wear a hat. What happens when you're a neurosurgeon? Is that important?
No, I would tell you the only thing that's important for, like, for example, yesterday I was on the beach all day, and I will wear the hat to break up things. But you need to realize, I said to you earlier that we bury our mitochondrial density in our brain. You're designed to get the infrared A light. And what people don't realize, red light in the solar spectrum is the one part of the spectrum that penetrates into your body 10 to 30 centimeters, because it has to get to every mitochondria because of the red light chromophores in there. The number one red light chromophore in your body is water. Number two is cytochrome C oxidase. Number three is the third cytochrome. Okay. So red light has to program all those things in order for it to work well. So I'm going to tell you, my standard answer is no. But since you live at the 26th latitude like I do, I don't think doing it for 8 to 10 hours a day is wise. You probably need to cover up at certain points at solar noon. The times that I do think it's great, probably from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and probably from 2 to 6 p.m. You know, like when you're coming into spring, you're going to have better light cycles. Right now, our light cycle is still pretty good. My favorite time to be on the beach is 2 to 6, 2 to 7. Okay. It's phenomenal for red light therapy.
So go straight through your cranium, straight into your brain.
Straight through the bone.
Straight through the bone. Wow. Where can people find you, Dr. Cruz? I know you've got a membership on your site. I know Patreon. Where can they find you? Where can they find more about you?
Well, you can find me on social media. Like if you want to dip your toe in and just want to see, am I for real or is this Memorex? You can go on my Dr. Jack Cruz page or my Cruz Longevity page on Facebook. You can find a lot of my articles for free on LinkedIn. You also can go to Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/Dr. Jack Cruz. If you want my wisdom in quote form, go to Instagram. Got over 4,000 quotes. Most of them are about quantum biology. Lately, there's been a lot of shit about COVID. That's a story for another day. I think on my old website, jackcruz.com, I have a form on there, and I will promise you, you'll find more information on that form than you want to shake a stick at. That stuff is all free. There's also an old blog on there where all the old leptin blogs and some of the cold thermogenesis blogs are on there. There's a lot. I mean, it takes you probably 10 years to read everything I've written. I tell most people to put your problem and my name in a Google box, and voila. That's probably the best way to do it. And I've done tons of podcasts. I mean, you know that. Yeah. So you can look at all my podcasts. If you want to hear different modes of how we get into it, this one is probably a little bit more higher level for people who probably know a little bit. But, my members always tell me every time I do a podcast, they listen to me, they pick up another pearl, or they see another side of the diamond, another facet that makes them realize that this is a big deal. And I don't want anybody to think that everything we talked about today is inclusive of really what's, going on in the world. There's a lot more to talk about. We didn't get into the details of water chemistry. We didn't talk about why taking Prozac or brushing your teeth with fluoridated toothpaste ruins the hydrogen bonding network in water. Those are all big deals. Yeah. And, probably a bigger deal based on the question you just asked me about, you need to pay a lot more attention from 26 to 29 about water chemistry. So that is an important thing. Have I done a podcast on the biophysics of fluoride? Yes. On my website, is there a story about Teflon, about how Teflon liberates fluorine and causes a problem because of the chemicals it uses? Yeah, there's a big story there. So if you're going to make your move, if you have any Teflon pots, throw them out. Yeah. Go to enamel, cast iron, things like that. Way better choice. These are like little things. I throw this little nugget out and you go, wait a minute, why is that the case? Yeah. That's another rabbit hole to jump down. So if you become a member on my site, I have silver, gold, platinum, and titanium. That's when you actually have more access to me. I do Q&As every month for my members, answer their questions. I also have a library of webinars that are out there that I did where I take specific topics and blow them up, like crazy. The latest one I just did is on Patreon, where I gave a lecture about Doug Wallace's video, and it took me 2 hours to go through the whole thing. So basically I take the science and explain it to you in English at simple terms so you understand what it means. So some of your listeners, if they liked this podcast, I would actually tell you, you may want to stop right there and go to that Patreon webinar, because if you want to know how we transform energy, that lecture on the 4th of July that I did this year was epic. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm really emotional because there's been such transformation in my life, in my family's lives, and the people that, I've treated over 21 years at the practice here, over 130,000 treatments, lectured over 10,000 medical professionals worldwide. And, you truly have been a person that I've looked up to. I've read and digested as much as I can. I'm still growing. I do one day want to shake your hand and actually give you a big squeeze and big hug and say thank you, because you've been instrumental in my health and performance journey. I'm going to get this word out as best as I can. I do want to connect with people that like the ophthalmologist, Montgomery, if we can do that, or anyone in South Africa who's, a black swan mitochondriac, or someone who's on the road to becoming a black swan mitochondriac. As many connections as you've got, I'd really appreciate them to get them on. This country, unfortunately, medically, generally is very, very conservative. For a tweet, what happened to Tim Noakes for one tweet, the emotional depletion that happened there from this very, very tight and conservative medical fraternity. So anyone you can connect me with, one day I do want to meet you and just celebrate your life and your curious, courageous, just character to declare the truth and not half-truths. So you're a man that I think of every single day when I watch the sunrise. You're a man that, my family knows and my friends know, because you've moved the needle. And you, like you've said in your podcast, it's not that food doesn't matter, but that's the 5th or the 6th or the 7th thing. It's what's going to change the game, what's going to move the needle. And so thank you so much, Dr. Jack Cruz. Look forward to more of your work, and just don't ever stop, because you're inspiring and you're empowered. Someone here in South Africa, and I don't know if you have any connections in South Africa with people that are black swan mitochondriacs at all.
No, I actually don't, but I will tell you, I guess I should say this. One of the things that I admire about South Africa is Nelson Mandela. Yeah. Remember we talked about earlier, embracing the suck. I think he's the person that absolutely embodies that idea when you consider what happened in his life. And unfortunately, I know a little bit about the politics of South Africa pretty well, because I have a good friend who is a person who lived in apartheid, who's an orthopedic surgeon in the United States now. He's the same age I am. And we talk every so often. He said, it's a shame that this change happened in my life. He goes, but if I look at the politics of what's going on in the country now, we're falling still off the track. We're falling off the track in different ways. He goes, it's amazing to me that we can't get it together. And I told him the same thing. I said, look, the same thing's going on in our country. The real problem is that people haven't come together. And I personally believe it's actually tied to the question that you asked me before when you tried to get at the feeling part of it. I think the more we all get our mitochondria better, the more we really appreciate the people who went out on the plank and did the things to change the world. We need to emulate those people in different ways that we can. Not everybody's going to be a Mandela. Not everybody's going to be a Martin Luther King. Not everybody's going to be an Einstein. Not everybody's going to be a Feynman. But you can be an Einstein, a Feynman, or a Mandela in your own way by helping other people see things that they can't see themselves. And sometimes it's a smile. Sometimes it's a comment. Sometimes it's a word. Sometimes it's a hand up. Sometimes it's a tweet. You just mentioned Tim Noakes. That tweet, I'm sure for Tim's perspective, cost him a lot of money to defend his medical license. But you know what it did? That horrible story that he had to live through probably changed the minds of a lot of people in South Africa that maybe now that they saw how he got screwed for a food story, maybe this will open their eyes up to some of the things that we talked about. Maybe it'll even affect him if he listens to this.
Yeah.
And you realize we need to have people in our lives that we don't agree with. Why? Because those are the people that force us to see things that maybe we would never be brought to seeing ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you so much. You're always welcome in South Africa. We've got great wildlife. We've got incredible sunrises. Your dollar goes a long way in this country. I would embrace you, your family, any of your connections, any of your tribe to come down here and give them a real picture of what's happening in South Africa, because it's an incredible outdoor country. We, at many times connected to nature, unfortunately, with this technical sort of life, are going indoors and with all this EMF and that. But we do have a great outdoors life, and I welcome you, and I welcome anyone of your family and your tribe to come.
All right, I appreciate it. Take care, Steve.
Thanks so much for your time. You too.
All right.
All the best, Dr. Jack. Cheers.